Beyond the cork-lined room, and the Proustian illusion of timelessness. As I once again extended my hands in that room, through clouds, vapours, steam, and fog, through the threads of sweaters I wore as a boy, as I felt again the warm, nubby texture of my flannel shirt, the particularly lovely one that I so treasured, the deep blue plaid one, suddenly there was again the social studies teacher at the blackboard, Mr. Shelland, the one of whom it was said that he had suffered, and continued to suffer from shell shock, the one in whose class I, being the obnoxious little prick I was, had dropped that large textbook onto the floor from a height sufficient to enable me to learn that indeed the rumour was true. The poor man's legs rose before me once again, seemingly carried by an unseen force quite off the ground. They shook violently. He then began to stare at me with a gaze I had not seen since I had held that little turtle in my hands as a boy, and, with a great deal of curiosity and not a little touch of sadism, poked its head, not meaning to seriously harm it, and most certainly not meaning to kill it, but very definitely to annoy it, to learn about its inner life and responses with very little regard for its feelings. And there was now that gaze again, fastened upon me with that very same rage, and, being whatever age I was, perhaps 14 years old, I was still very much that obnoxious little turtle-torturing boy, now become the hopelessly obnoxious adolescent. I recall a bit of shame and regret, though not all that much. Had I carried out that little experiment this morning, at this point in my life, I imagine I might very well intentionally drive my car into a concrete trestle later this afternoon. Who was that little boy? Where did he go? I don't miss him in the least. He was a little shit. I should feel pity for him, for he was constantly beaten, wished dead, and suffered 1,000 other existential insults, and those on a very regular basis. But I do not. I haven't the slightest bit of empathy for him. If he is my inner child, I want him once again promptly spanked and beaten with belts and drawers, all the more and all the harder. The little fuck. It was almost certainly a very good thing that my child was not born a boy. I remember worrying myself sick that the future little crotch turd my abominable second wife was ferrying about within her would be a boy, and that I'd involuntarily become his abuser. This after observing my reaction to some little piece of shit on a park playground, some snot-nosed brat running about pretending a tree branch was a sort of gun, or, more likely, his dimly hoped-for, gigantic future penis. I wanted to swat that kid so very badly, and hence assumed I would do precisely that were my child to be a boy. Thankfully, it was female, which made it ever so much easier, even intermittently delightful for a good number of years, 12, 14, and then, sadly, from that lovely little feminine chrysalis, there emerged hardly a butterfly, but a vile winged harpy with razor-sharp fangs, a dreadful, loathsome creature whom I, to this day, have a terrible time acknowledging had sprung from my loins. But that is another story, for another time, or, better, for a time which shall never occur, at least not as a result of my once again telling that squalid tale. It and she are far too inconsequential. And who was that man on the playground? The one that so wished to smack that little brat? Or who took such delight in so many of his daughter's achievements? Her birthday parties, our trips here, there, to parks, malls, the houses of relatives, friends, and lakeside cottages? Not me, surely. I cannot touch him, find him, be him, nor do I wish to. I can still see him, through countless mists, and buried deep in smoke, ash, cinders, and, above all, stupefied astonishment. But that he is I? That there is a sort of platonic realm, some timeless realm, in which he and I are one, some block universe whose praises I ought sing now? ridiculous. And if it isn't as preposterous as it seems to me, it might as well be, for that is a truth to which I now have, and will never in future have, the slightest meaningful access. I have had my Proustian Madeleine moments, indeed I have. Were I to walk into a room at this moment, and were it to smell of stale cigarettes and mothballs, it would be more than likely that the image of my kind, at times cranky, and always utterly adorable Nana would rise before me like a goddess and fill my heart with joy and love. And perhaps, for that moment, but it would only be a moment, I would be that boy in her kitchen in Providence, much loved by her, or so it felt to me at the time, and so I would like now to believe, but to claim that in those moments I have transcended into some enduring boundless world in which time has no meaning, nay, death has no meaning. This is an assertion weak-minded people make in an attempt to soothe themselves. Surely only that, and nothing more. There is not a shred of evidence for it, nor, granted, is there any evidence against it, but it is a fable. Would that I could embrace it. It would make navigating through what shall surely be the shit show of my remaining years somewhat more tolerable. I could look upon old age, illness and death with the grace of God knows whom, for, in fact, I've never met such an evolved person, and doubt very much that I ever shall. Every person I've ever known who has found themselves a few paces from the grave has been more than a little miserable, terrified, disappointed, disillusioned, and stupendously depressed, as I will be. Of that, there seems little question. When I've my wits about me, which is most of the time, I find it a laughably kitschy little fairy tale, worthy only of contempt, as is anyone who professes it. Those who do are inevitably the sorts of fools who wish to convince you that we are spiritual beings, that we're on a journey, that we've chosen this particular incarnation because we saw quite clearly that it was the one in which we could most learn and grow, as if the universe were a kind of buttfuck Arkansas public school writ large. These are the sorts of persons I would love to slap silly every bit as much as I did that little fuck running about the playground with his imaginary machine gun and much hoped for future gargantuan cock, which he had formed from a bit of a tree. And then there is the claim that, through art, we can reach this timeless realm. Not only that we can, but that it is obviously the only way in which we can do so. Let's pause for a moment. Who is it that is most likely to make this claim? Well, that's more than a little easy to answer, is it not? The self-described artist. Big surprise there. He who is not a whit more or less grandiose and narcissistic than the self-described landscaper or plumber, whose timeless realms, one would imagine, consist of eternal dreamscapes full of distant, discarded, and barely observed bags upon bags of organic fertilizer, toilet plungers, and drain pipes. Above all, a world of angels in which no one pisses or shits. Am I any less guilty than any of these imbeciles? Am I any less the star of my own idiotic soap opera? Surely not. I'm probably the worst of the lot at the end of the day. I occasionally feel these Proust-like ripples. I am something of a two-bit poet. I have something of a soul. I hear the music in the claim. I do. I am touched by it at times. At other times, I am revolted by the painfully obvious ways in which those that embrace and prattle on about it reveal themselves as cowards, simply attempting to comfort themselves, to prop themselves up in the most unseemly of fashions. If indeed there is this transcendent realm, one assumes that every last shit I've taken, every idiotic thing that has ever come spewing out of my mouth, in other words, the substance of very close to the entirety of my life, occupies that very same fraction of what would be the abstract timeless film of my life. That it all sits in some tin can, in the projection room of whichever demonic Gnostic god it is that manages the theatre, that theatre being the whole of time and space, the entirety of the universe. Thus, it's not just my beloved Nana in a high-end, believable virtual reality that would caressingly envelop me, that I would find it would be, rather, the entire disgusting fabric of my life, a life which should never have been, a life which I have wished, from its very beginning, to have never occurred. That the tin can would never so much as have arrived in the projection room. And so, what is the takeaway from all these ravings, these absurd infantile folk tales that nincompoops so constantly tell themselves? Simply this, that there is a timeless world of very close to comprehensive, total banality, venality, vanity, moral rot, evil, physical decay, betrayal, pain, and boredom. That the vast majority of one's life, if not all of it, has been nothing other than galaxy upon galaxy of unspeakable, frozen horror. Okay, agreed, perhaps containing the very occasional good-natured comet bearing some small whiff of inspiration, some legitimate pleasure. We can grant that. I ask simply of anyone who professes to be the least bit honest, to place the positive and negative contents of that tin can, its joys and sufferings both, on opposing sides of a cosmic balance scale, and to then observe the behaviour of its pans, beams, and pointers. Take care to do that just prior to the side which contains the moral refuse and filth collapsing into and upon itself, and becoming the primordial black hole, the black hole which is I, which is you, which is this shit-engulfed world, this universe in which we trudge onwards through our weary lives, around which those extraordinarily rare, momentarily revelatory comets spin for a few moments in a wildly accelerating cloud of gas, and are then stretched, ripped apart, and swallowed. They are nothing, not even a speck in the eye of Polyphemus. Nothing. There are to be no luminous, numinous reconciliations or reunions, no coming together of the tens of thousands of selves you have cast off, unaware that you have done so, and of which you continue to be unaware. Recite the fairy tale to yourself, if it helps you drift into a temporarily soothing slumber. I don't in the least begrudge you that. It's a fable, Marcel Proust told himself. He was a genius, and I am anything but, and yet, being perhaps 2% more clever than the average slob, I can recognise that this stupendous genius was nourishing himself in the face of death on fairy tales. But do not profess such things to me, unless you can dress them up in prose as ravishing as Proust's. Do not assert them in my presence, nor have the wish that I take them seriously as revealing anything at all about this nightmare into which we've all been thrown, without our ever having asked. That is to say, as revealing anything other than your own soul-crushing terror. You are nothing other than a two-bit charwoman, indulging in a vain attempt to sanitize the bottomless cesspit which is your existence. And, as you scrub, you play to yourself, through your dearly purchased noise-cancelling headphones, the most vapid and jejune of musics. Spare me its impoverished harmonies. I too, when I am able, attempt to siphon the endless bags of manure hanging from my shoulders like so many voracious birds of prey as I slog through my days. I too attempt to draw them through some fine straw of my own invention, or so I like to tell myself, into the temporary shape of perhaps a lily, a precious jewel, a beautiful woman's smile, or teardrop. The difference being this: I know I'm lying, I accept that I'm lying, and lies have their place. They more than have their place. They are the most wondrous of things. Without them, we would drop to the ground like flies after a single breath, a single step. I eagerly and happily embrace lies and lying. I embrace anything which hides from me, if only for a few moments, the abhorrent nature of the world. And there is nothing better than a good lie to achieve that result. But I have spent far too much time on this, on you, and on your weak-minded drivel. You are all too much the low-hanging fruit, and, I might add, a far from pleasant-tasting one. Rather, you resemble far more a sort of brown banana or bitter melon, a foul thing from which one ought rather simply turn away. Do I look in the mirror, smile a deceitful, hideous Dorian Gray smile, and tell myself I have in some sense transfigured those countless bags of shit? I do not for a moment. I am hopelessly vain and horridly narcissistic. But I do stop short of making any claim quite as ridiculous as that one. I do give myself a pass for momentarily indulging in them. No one can survive 10 minutes without an infinity of falsehoods and self-delusions. The world is a pigsty. I am in pain. They soothe me. Case closed. That hardly makes me a monster, nor do they make you one. In your case, it makes you only an idiot. And yet, we are all idiots and monsters, I as much as anyone. If a bunch of wandering carbon atoms are forced to become a diamond, is the universe thus enriched? For me it is, but only for that moment. To make a tiny bit of beauty, to make a confession of some sort, to tidy it up, to make it sing, glow, stare up at the sky from the gutter, to make of one's rage, grief, or humiliation an idea. That is no small thing. For the maker, that is. It enables him, that him being me, in this case, to keep moving, breathing, shoving this or that bit of food down his gullet. What does it do for others? Very little. More likely, not a thing. If it does do something for them, it is only their affair, and has naught to do with me. They could have done the very same, with a bit of drivel in a magazine, with this or that weed in their garden, which they've inspected particularly closely, with a mango, or with a remark from a stranger which touches or enrages them. It's their world, and theirs only, as utterly inaccessible to me as is mine to them. These things arise only out of pain, boredom, envy, curiosity, and wounded pride. One seeks to impress, to enchant, to wound. That's the first impulse, a very natural one. And it is as far as most folks can get. To make something else out of all that, that's the trick. To turn it into an idea. Don't misunderstand. The goal I just described remains a perfect fool's errand, the purest bullshit. Yet one can soothe oneself in so doing in a way that, it appears to me at any rate, is quite a bit less unseemly than the ignorant assertions and fables described above. Yes, I am quite as full of shit as you are, full of vanity and snobbery and jealousy and grandiosity. There's no denying it, nor do I wish to. And yet, I think, at the same time, that I am somehow marginally less laughable than you, less loathsome, less ridiculous than you, because I've seen through the joke. I've heard and understood its punchline. But then again, you think the very same. Which leads us where, precisely? To what conclusion? That we're both simply trying to survive. I tell myself that I'm wearing somewhat better duds than you while doing it, but that's just another lie. Nothing can or does absolve either one of us for being the despicable vain morons the two of us are, or, more accurately, the 9 billion of us are. What we do is absolutely necessary if we wish to survive, which is another matter which we are not presently discussing. Necessary, but nonetheless awful. Were I a sculptor, I would not, for a moment, tell myself that my little pint-sized, pea-brained David was not born of mud, not sitting in it right now, not engulfed in it. When I am lazy of mind, self-serving, and vain, I tell myself I've found a sort of sacred frequency in my disgust, in this life of mine, that I've made something lovely, or turned a bit of malice into an artistically rendered idea, but it's all nonsense, and I know it perfectly well. All the while I'm soothing myself with the notion, and yet I cannot help myself. To put one foot in front of another, even for a fraction of a second, requires lie after lie after lie, endless suspensions of disbelief. One becomes a veritable walking suspension of disbelief. One ought wear the t-shirt or hat, making it plain to everyone one meets. I'm redeemed by this sort of bullshit for, on a good day, 10 minutes. Redeemed, as in saved. Saved as in, perhaps, not blowing my fucking brains out for the next half hour. The pain has been forced to do tricks, to dance, to walk through hot coals, and not to simply live rent-free in my head. Those things are true. That is something some grandiose blockhead might refer to as redemption, especially if one is the worst and most loathsome sort of pretentious twat. You can't go on. You go on. Not a new thought. Of that I am well aware. Looking at the sky for a moment hardly removes you from the gutter, for the clouds above are streaked too with its filth, but you catch a glimpse of that cloud, shit-stained though it is. You smell a lilac for a moment, in the midst of the overpowering stench of dung, which is everywhere, not least within you. You haven't quite transcended your miserable, hopelessly corporeal state, but, for a moment, you are lighter. You have taken the most delightful of craps. There is a momentary bounce in your step. It is quite marvellous, until it is not, which will be all too soon. To expel, to evacuate, is to grab hold of a bit of relief, if only for a moment, and it shall only ever be for not more than a moment, and that's as good as it shall ever get. Yet, on an acceptable day, one somewhat less engulfed with the usual suffering, good enough, an absurd moment of grace. Not one we would care to call amazing, but grace nonetheless. The burden is temporarily less. The constant stench, for a moment, a bit less appalling. Your hands are a bit less full of mud, of shit. There's a bit less toilet paper hanging out of your ass, that sort of thing. With no self-pity, or, at the very least, a minimum. You take the horror, the loss, the malice, the waste, and the absurdity, and, although you know that a moment later it will all return with redoubled force, to convince you the world is the shit show you've always thought it, and that the arbiters of eternal punishment are still busy sharpening their knives as proof of the futility of absolutely everything, for that moment, that one divine moment, perhaps two, perhaps 3 moments, you will have spun it into the web of awfulness, and it will take its place there. And that is something. No forgiveness, absolution, or cleansing. Just seeing, making, and creating form, a thing that does not and cannot hurt you, that does not wish to hurt you. A fleck of light in an underground cavern, the one you're still in, that you've always been in, and in which you will die, from which you've emerged, and to which you shall return, yet in which, for a few moments, you have managed to feel alive and be glad of it. This is not some eternity in a grain of sand bit of horseshit, no, unless that eternity is the cosmic weave, which is composed almost entirely of spun threads of fecal matter, that dark matter too rarely remarked upon. The gift the universe occasionally provides is this. For a moment, for an hour, you are not neck-deep in garbage, trying to not simply choke to death. You can do it with a tune, a poem, a joke, a tender word. Do it whenever and however you are allowed, for you cannot choose to do it. It will simply come upon you Arrive now and then. Don't snuff it out, that's all. Don't turn away. Allow it to pass through you and out of you into the larger world. For a moment then, you, and if you have an auditor or reader who pretends to themselves or to you that they understand you, which is, needless to say, utterly absurd, but no matter, you will both be momentarily alive, that is to say, not swallowed, macerated, or flayed alive. In that moment, and in that moment only. You haven't connected in the way either of you might like, or imagine is possible. That's a given. But even this, just this, is a lot better than nothing. It is a distraction, and only a distraction, as is absolutely everything which isn't entirely god-awful, but it is a distraction of a somewhat more noble kind. You are alive. Oh, you were alive the moment before, when you were gagging on arsenic-laced croissants and knee-deep in shit. Yes, you were alive then as well. But you are now somehow lighter. For the moment, someone might feel a vibration from all this narcissistic archaeology you've busied yourself with, but it will be theirs and theirs only. You will ultimately have not a thing to do with them. Not really. There can never be any actual connection or fusion. And you don't do any of this for them. Oh no, most certainly not. For their needs and desires shall be served, if not by your dog shit, then by the dog shit of another, or by a bit of moonlight, a tuna fish sandwich, whatever it is. You have no obligations, and you are to have absolutely no expectations or wishes in this regard. You have, perhaps, provided some tremor, some resonance with which they feel momentarily in sympathy, but the only cavern in which that echo matters or has meaning is your own, the hall of endless mirrors which is your life. Look out your window at the shit-stained clouds. It's a sunny day. Do you not see a fleck of light there, drenched in shit as well? That is true, but nonetheless, a fleck of light. That fleck of light is within you, presently dissolving in the pools of hydrochloric acid in your guts, but lighting up your stomach walls, if only for an instant. For the instant you manage to tell yourself this self-soothing little bit of smug, rehearsed, self-satisfying nonsense, at any rate,